Freedom without purpose is a prison with open doors. One often realizes the value of the anchor only after they have drifted helplessly into the abyss of the open sea. Seneca. The exact moment the door closes and silence sets in, one of the most misunderstood psychological phenomena of modern human dynamics begins. At first, for her, everything seems to have the intoxicating taste of absolute liberation. It is a rehearsed speech, repeated in front of the mirror and to her friends, where she says with conviction that she needs to rediscover herself, that she needs to find herself in a world that supposedly erased her, insisting that it is not her fault, but rather that she just lost the shine she now swears she will recover. But what she will never say out loud, what almost no woman admits even under emotional torture, is that in the instant of this rupture, something fundamental within the architecture of her soul also breaks. We need to dissect the anatomy of this emotional disaster, because when divorce happens, the experience is diametrically opposite for the two sexes. The man, in his psychic structure, feels the immediate impact of an implosion, like a building collapsing onto itself, a true internal earthquake that destroys his foundations. She, on the other hand, driven by social and hormonal narratives, lives the opposite. She lives the explosion. She leaves the house charged with a dangerous chemical mixture of adrenaline and fear, believing piously that the world is in debt to her and that now the universe will reward her generously just for having followed what she calls her heart. During the first weeks, or perhaps months, everything around her seems to shine with the promise of the new, exciting and promising. It is the phase of aesthetic metamorphosis where she cuts her hair, radically changes her style of dressing, and floods social media with photos smiling, accompanied by those classic captions of overcoming and strength. However, if you look with clinical attention, you will perceive that the new version of her is carefully constructed, brick by brick, not for herself, as she claims, but specifically for the eyes that still observe her in a calculated stage performance. It is what we call the theater of liberation, a dramatic play where she is the triumphant protagonist, but the human brain, that ancient biological machine, does not rebuild itself with hashtags or Instagram filters. While she acts for the digital audience, there is a silent, almost surgical reconfiguration happening behind the scenes of her mind, the so-called emotional neuroplasticity. What was once a neural circuit dedicated to safety, predictable routine, and family belonging is now brutally replaced by a circuit of self-affirmation and aggressive social survival. She begins, like an addict in withdrawal, to seek stimuli that desperately validate this fragile new identity. Attention, approval, novelty. Each like on a photo becomes a fulfilled micro-desire, a quick dose of dopamine. Each message received from a stranger or an old acquaintance functions as a narcissistic reminder that she is still desirable, that she still has market value. It is here that the tragedy is drawn, for external validation begins to replace, like a cheap prosthesis, the internal love and security she voluntarily lost when she decided to leave the protective structure of marriage. While the man faces the absolute silence of the void in his home, trying to rationally understand what went wrong, she tries to fill her silence with incessant movement, with noise and distractions. She goes out more, talks louder, drastically changes her circle of friends, bringing close those liberated friends who appear like vultures, multiplying the toxic advice that you deserve more and the world is yours. She believes with all her might that she is moving up in life, ascending to a new level of existence, but the naked and raw reality is that she is only running away, running desperately, because deep down, in the deepest layers of her subconscious, her mind is still viscerally connected to the bond she built and nurtured for years. The body may change beds, may feel the warmth of other sheets, but the soul still carries the indelible mark of the name she abandoned. It is exactly at this inflection point that the deepest and most dangerous mutation begins. The displacement of identity, where the figure of the wife ceases to exist to give way to something undefined. Then arises a woman who needs at all costs to prove something to the world, and principally to herself. She does not just want to be free. This freedom is not enough. She wants to be validated and applauded for having chosen this freedom. She wants to be seen as strong, desirable, modern, a warrior who defeated the bonds of domestic patriarchy. That former woman who cared, who waited with patience, who dreamed of the stability of the home, is slowly suffocated and replaced by a cynical version that swears to the four winds she needs no one. But psychology teaches us that the more someone repeats an affirmation, the more their unconscious screams the opposite, revealing the lie behind the insistence. While this occurs, the man, lost between the piercing pain and the silence of the walls, still erroneously believes he was discarded because he was not good enough, failing to see the biological reality of the process. He does not perceive that her transformation is not just an emotional change or one of opinion. It is a profound chemical alteration. Her dopaminergic system enters a mode of constant search, addicted to the new, the exciting, the different, like a hungry predator that is never satiated. Everything, absolutely everything, becomes fuel to try to sustain the gigantic void left by the absence of the home structure. It is for this chemical reason that many men confuse themselves and torture themselves when they see her so happy and radiant right after the divorce. Understand once and for all, it is not happiness. It is anesthesia. It is a euphoria induced by novelty. But time is a silent and relentless enemy, and the same brain circuit that feeds on this validation begins, inevitably, to wear out. The moment arrives when the likes diminish, when the glances on the street no longer come with the same predatory intensity, when casual encounters become repetitive and superficial. It is in this moment that the void returns with full force. Only now, this hole is deeper and darker because she no longer has the home to return to, no longer has the safe harbor she despised. The man, even wounded and bleeding, can rebuild his foundations. The woman, however, when she realizes she burned the bridges behind her in an act of pride, faces the mirror with genuine terror. That is where the internal interrogation begins. She begins to question herself, not out loud, so as not to ruin the character, but in the sleepless early mornings when the phone is silent, the battery is dying, and no one is watching her performance. The woman who believed she was the sun of her new solar system realizes that the universe is cold and indifferent when the ego is not constantly fed. It is the beginning of the painful awakening, a phase that almost no one mentions in the media or bar conversations, because the prevailing social discourse needs to maintain the illusion of female liberation as an absolute victory without costs. But inside her, the truth pulses differently. She feels a physical lack of being cared for, of having someone who saw her with tenderness and protection, and not just with momentary carnal desire. She realizes, with bitterness, that freedom without purpose is just loneliness disguised in nice clothes. And the modern woman, after divorce, often becomes a prisoner of the very narrative she created. This is the dirty secret no one tells men. Admitting this regret would be revealing that, despite appearances of success and joy, her void is as deep, or perhaps even more abyssal, than his. With the passing of time, this transformation deepens and calcifies. The woman, who previously defined herself by the romantic bond, starts to define herself obsessively by the absence of it. She no longer wants to be remembered as someone's ex, and so she creates a persona, a rigid social mask molded by pain and the need for approval. This new version speaks loudly about empowerment, but lives feeding on memories. She smiles for the digital world, but feels the crushing weight of her choices in the dead hours when no one is around. Society gives a standing ovation to the woman who moved on, but no one has the courage to ask the emotional price of this step. Because the inconvenient truth is that moving on sometimes is just running in circles frantically to not have to stop and think. Men rarely see this corrosive process. When looking from the outside, through social media or friends' reports, they see only the woman who seems well, who seems happy, and believe the lie that she forgot him completely. But neuroscience tells us it is not quite like that. The female brain has a greater evolutionary tendency toward rumination, a type of mental looping that relives past emotions with richness of detail. And the more she tries to erase these memories, the stronger they become due to resistance. That is why, even months or years later, small memories return like ghosts to haunt her. His perfume passing on the street, the sound of a similar laugh, the touch of simple daily life that does not return. Only now, trapped in her pride, she cannot admit it, for pride has become her new anchor, the only thing preventing her from sinking. She begins to rationalize desperately. It was for the best. He didn't deserve me. I needed this to grow. These are mantras, phrases she repeats exhaustively to convince her own mind of what her heart still refuses to believe. It is a classic defense mechanism and also the beginning of a dangerous emotional dissociation. Little by little, she learns to turn off the switch of affection, like someone turning off the lights of a room that was once inhabited and full of life. It is a self-induced anesthesia. She decides she no longer wants to feel, because feeling means remembering, and remembering is to suffer unbearably. It is under the effect of this anesthesia that her behavior changes radically. The woman who once valued deep connection, intimacy of the soul, now prefers the superficial lightness of liquid relationships. It is not because she evolved or completely changed her essence. It is because she broke internally. The love she offered before was full of surrender and courageous vulnerability. Now, it is filtered by fear, calculation, and distrust. That is why so many men who get involved with recently divorced women feel this confusing duality. They are intense and distant at the same time. They want the touch, the skin, but avoid the emotional tie as if it were a disease. They seek company to not be alone, but flee from real intimacy. Society, blinded by the narrative of the independent woman, does not realize that this independence is sometimes just a mask, an armored defense against the pain of having believed too much in the past. The woman who called herself free now binds herself to a new type of prison, much crueler, the prison of image. She needs to seem well, seem happy, seem strong, 24 hours a day. And this demands a constant vital energy that drains her. Inside, there is a tiredness growing in silence, an emotional exhaustion from sustaining a scenographic life that no longer feeds the soul. While this occurs on her stage, the man follows a different path, backstage. In the beginning, he is the one who suffers most, feeling on his skin the impact of abandonment, the loneliness of the broken routine, the deafening silence of the empty home. But it is precisely this terrible silence that transforms him. Pain, when there is nowhere to run, forces him to look at himself in the mirror. What was despair turns into laser focus. What was neediness turns into Spartan discipline. He begins to rebuild his life slowly, brick by brick, without fanfare, without needing to prove anything to anyone on social media. And it is in this silent and solitary reconstruction that the man is reborn, forged in the fire of loss. The woman, on the other hand, moves further and further away from her own feminine essence. She begins to get used to a new type of addictive pleasure, the pleasure of cheap attention, of momentary power over other men, of the psychological game of seduction. Some erroneously call this the discovery phase, but it is in truth the phase of escape, because there is no real discovery without internal confrontation, and she avoids this confrontation at all costs. She does not want to look in the mirror and see what she lost. She wants to believe in the fiction that she exchanged lives, not that she lost a valuable life. But the masks, however well made they are, begin to crack. The body feels before the mind admits. Anxiety grows without apparent reason. Sleep fails. The heart accelerates with small things. The void begins to charge compound interest. It is the inevitable return of consciousness. The neurochemistry of euphoria runs out. Tolerance increases, and the brain starts to demand something deeper, something the modern world and its quick pleasures no longer know how to give meaning to. It is at this critical point that many men realize something curious. After months, sometimes years, she reappears. A vague message, a random memory, an unpretentious "How are you?" Do not be fooled. It is not love. It is the reflection of a soul beginning to miss the structure she herself destroyed with her own hands. But time is a river that does not flow backward. The man she left behind is no longer the same man she knew and manipulated. He evolved in pain, learned in silence, and saw the truth few see. Divorce does not liberate. It reveals who people really are. Because deep down, what changes after divorce is not just the civil status, but the essence of the being. And the woman who thought she was becoming free was actually becoming someone whom the void itself began to dominate completely. After the divorce, time becomes the greatest judge of all. In the first months, she still feels the power of novelty, new experiences, new people, new sensations. But time is relentless. The new loses its flavor. The faces in the nightclub change, and loneliness begins to infiltrate the intervals between one pleasure and another, like weeds in concrete. She begins to realize that freedom without direction is just a more sophisticated and cruel type of prison. Superficial conversations, repeated encounters, pathetic attempts to feel desired. Everything starts to have the same bitter taste of mechanical repetition. It is as if life had become a cycle of promises that are never fulfilled.
What was once excitement becomes boring routine.
The cell phone, which once vibrated with constant attention from suitors, now remains silent for hours on end. The mirror that reflected the euphoria of transformation now shows a tired and dejected look. She begins to realize that behind the heavy makeup and fashionable clothes, there is a woman who no longer recognizes herself. The old identity was destroyed, pulverized, but no new solid identity managed to occupy its place. It is a void of identity, the same void she tried to deny when she said, with arrogance, that she would move on. The female mind is complex and creates labyrinthine narratives to justify emotions. But the unconscious never lies. Behind ready-made phrases like, "It was the best for me," "I am in another phase," "I learned to love myself," exists a pain that finds no name. It is the pain of the loss of herself. Because when she left her husband, she did not abandon just a man. She abandoned the woman she was beside him. And that version of her, the one who dreamed, cared, and saw herself as part of something greater, now exists no more, sacrificed on the altar of the ego. She tries to fill the space with work projects, exotic trips, new fitness goals, but nothing seems to satisfy, because what she really seeks is not success, it is meaning. And human meaning is not born from the external, it is born from the bond. The human being is relational by nature, and when the bond is broken abruptly, the body feels as if it had lost a physical limb. The brain continues seeking what was lost, like a phantom hand trying to touch what is no longer there. While she lives this frustrated search, the man follows a quieter, yet infinitely more stable path. He learns to be alone, learns to rise again amidst absolute chaos. He learns that pain is a cruel but fair teacher. And the more he accepts the loss, the more he matures and strengthens. The woman, on the other hand, tries to deny the pain, and it is precisely this denial that traps her in the past. She believes forgetting is a sign of strength, when in truth it is just futile resistance. True power lies in facing the shadow, not running from it. That is why, years later, many men who re-encounter their ex-wives notice something curious and disturbing. The physical beauty may remain, but there is something different in the look, a heavy mixture of nostalgia and veiled regret. She still smiles, but the smile is rehearsed. It does not reach the eyes. She talks about professional achievements, but avoids mentioning what she lost in her personal life, because deep down she knows the price of such freedom was too high. And the cruelest part is that the modern world convinced her that this exorbitant price was progress. The psychological transformation after divorce is not just emotional, it is spiritual. The woman goes through a process of disconnection from her vital essence. The archetype of the wife, representing welcoming, bonding, the home, is replaced by the archetype of the independent warrior. But this war is waged against herself. The feminine, in its purest nature, is surrender and reception. When she disconnects from this, she loses the capacity to nourish herself emotionally. The result is a reactive existence, giving answers to the world, but without an interior root. She begins to collect experiences, like someone collecting stamps, but no experience truly fills her. She collects men, but no man touches her soul, because what she seeks is not another body. It is the reflection of the home she destroyed. Unconsciously, she seeks the same type of man she left, not because she still loves him, but because she tries in some way to recreate the emotional structure she lost. Only now she does it with fear, and fear distorts everything. Men, in turn, perceive this distortion. After a certain time, when they heal, they look back with frightening clarity. They understand that love does not always die. Sometimes it just changes form. But they also perceive that not every woman who leaves returns whole, because some lose themselves irreversibly on the path to their own freedom. They believe they are choosing a new life, but in truth, they are just moving away from their own soul. And that is where the cruelest and supreme irony of divorce arises. In the end, the man she thought she was losing, the one she considered insufficient, is the same one she spends years trying to find again in other faces, in other bodies. Only he has already learned not to be found. With the passing of years, transformations consolidate. The woman who one day believed she was starting a new life now lives among echoes of the past and illusions of the present. As appearance changes and gravity acts, the essence screams. The shine of those who moved on begins to lose strength before the truths that time reveals with cruelty.
The mask of self-sufficiency weighs tons. The world that once applauded her now forgets her, seeking the next younger novelty. And in the silence of the early mornings, when external voices cease, only the internal dialogue remains, that severe judge she tried to avoid during the whole process. She thinks of the choices, of the small decisions that seemed liberating at the time, but which distanced her from herself. She thinks of the harsh words she said, of the doors she slammed shut, of the bridges she burned with pride, and begins to realize that behind the narrative of liberation existed only fear. Fear of aging, fear of routine, fear of being invisible. Divorce, deep down, was less about liberation and more about escape. Escape from her own vulnerability, from her own shadow, from the responsibility of maturing within love instead of escaping it. Now, what remains is consciousness, and it hurts like an exposed wound. The post-divorce woman enters a silent phase, a kind of emotional desert where nothing blooms easily. She tries to love again, but the heart does not respond with the same surrender. It is calloused. Trust was replaced by cold analysis, spontaneity by risk calculation. Each gesture is measured. Each emotion is filtered by layers of defense. And love, which once flowed like a mighty river, is now a glass of water she holds with trembling hands, afraid of spilling the last drop. Meanwhile, the man she left follows an opposite ascending path. In the beginning, he was destroyed, yes. He lost the ground, lost purpose, lost faith in life as a couple. But this destruction purified him as fire purifies gold. He had to remake himself from absolute zero, learn to suffice, rebuild his own value without depending on female validation. And in this painful process, he discovered something she has not yet managed. True freedom is born from self-mastery, not from escaping the other. He learned to transform pain into brute strength, loneliness into unshakable focus, rejection into personal power. When the reunion happens, and it always happens, even if only in a crossing of glances or in memories, the difference is stark, palpable in the air. She looks at him and sees a different man, more centered, colder, more distant, and realizes with a shock that he no longer seeks her. He no longer needs her. His look, which one day begged for answers and affection, is now the serene look of someone who understood everything and moved on. She feels the crushing weight of this because, for the first time, she understands that the love he offered back then was not weakness, it was courage. And she exchanged it for a dream of freedom that never truly existed. Female psychology after divorce is a minefield of insoluble contradictions. She convinces herself she is stronger, but in truth is more sensitive and fragile. She calls herself more independent, but feels a desperate lack of being cared for. She claims she learned to love herself, but only feels alive when observed by third parties. The ego, now in total command, tries to replace the heart, but fails miserably, because the ego builds high walls, and love only exists where there are bridges. In the end, there is no winner or loser in this war. There is only the awakening, late for some, transformative for others. Divorce,
like every profound rupture, is a test of supreme consciousness. Some rise from the ashes, others get lost in the smoke. She may even rebuild a new life, have a new partner, but she will never be the same woman as before, because there is a cosmic price in denying one's own nature. And this price is the void, an elegant, silent void, masked by phrases of empowerment and photos of happiness manufactured in a studio.
The man, if he has learned the lesson, holds no grudge. He understands that love is not possession, it is a mirror, and the reflection she offered served for him to see how much he needed to elevate and evolve as a man. That is why many men, after divorce, reach levels of maturity, financial success, and mental clarity they would never have within a relationship that diminished and drained them. Pain made them grow, abandonment made them strong, and, ironically, the end became the true beginning of their lives. The woman, on the other hand, continues trying to decipher the enigma of what went wrong, looking back with a toxic mixture of nostalgia and denial. On some nights she dreams of the past, on others she tries to erase it with alcohol or distractions. But the truth, however painful it may be, is that the love she destroyed was the same one that sustained her. And no new relationship, no new me, no new beginning will be capable of reproducing that pure feeling, because it was born of innocence, and innocence, once lost, never returns. It is a non-renewable resource. That is why many men need to understand what this script reveals, not to hate women, but to see reality. See the hidden dynamics, the repeated cycle, the emotional trap that imprisons both sexes. Because if the man does not comprehend the deep psychology of the post-divorce woman, he will end up living the same cycle with another face, another name, but the same tragic story. Ignorance perpetuates pain, consciousness liberates, and in the end, the greatest secret is this: divorce does not only transform the relationship, it transforms souls irrevocably. The man who learns from this is never fooled the same way again. The woman who awakens from this is never the same again. But the sad statistic is that the majority do not awaken. They just continue playing roles, believing in convenient narratives, hiding purulent wounds under the makeup of independence. And that is why few truly heal. When the curtains fall and the theater of modern love ends, only the naked truth remains that no one dares to say. The woman who was once a wife is now a shadow of what she could have been. And the man who survived abandonment carries in silence the power of never being the same again, because he understood what everyone should know. After divorce, she changes, loses herself, and fragments. But he awakens.